United States, we have the greatest country in the world. It is what I would consider the easiest country in the world to make money, accumulate wealth, but in the same tune, it's one of the easiest countries in the world to lose it overnight. So we're going to talk about asset protection basics. So let's start off just by talking about the 5 biggest mistakes people make when protecting their assets. And number 1, I think the biggest mistake is not believing you are a target or you will ever be a target. I hear that all the time. People say, well, I've made it this long and no one's ever sued me and I've never had a problem yet. Actually, I had a guy that came in and I told him about the risk with his real estate and he said, oh, listen, I've been doing real estate for 40 years, never had a problem. Sure enough, he gets an ADA claim not too long. Right after that, he comes back in and he says, what do I do now? Not a thing. You can't do a thing now. It's fraudulent conveyance if you try to move money in the midst of a lawsuit knowing that a creditor is coming after you. So one of the biggest problems people I think have is not believing you're a target. I think in this country you always have to understand that we are in a country, the most litigious country in the world. I mean, for every 1,000 lawsuits in the United States, the United Kingdom has 1, to give you some idea. So number 2 is not protecting against all attacks. And we'll talk about this in a minute. A lot of people will protect the golden eggs, but they don't understand how to protect the goose, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. Number 3, incorrect ownership. So many people running around, they think that they have assets that are protected, and they are just not setting up the right ownership. This can get as basic as just an individual account, a joint with rights or survivorship account. And even when people do what's called a TOD or a transfer on death or a POD, a payable on death account, these are incorrect ownerships if you're trying to achieve asset protection. And number 4, protecting the wrong things. I mean, again, you have to look at what is at value and what is at risk, and you protect those things that are at highest risk. And number 5, incorrectly structuring. Now, sometimes this is because people are misled, they don't understand, they have a general concept of what other people have told them. And so here today, I'm going to lay it out for you, going to give you the bottom line, and this way some of you may like this and some of you may not like this. So first, let's talk about who is a target. Well, there's 100 million lawsuits filed every normal year in the United States. Lawsuits go up by 20% in crisis. So if we look at the virus crisis, I've said this over and over again, we saw this in 2001. We saw it in 2008. The lawsuits will start to fly. Not just between corporations. People are suing the SBA. Businesses are suing their insurance companies. And you're going to see a major increase when people get sick and they are going to try to blame locations. They're going to try to blame other people. You're going to see an increase in litigation in automobiles and liabilities. You're going to see an increase in lawn care workers suing homeowners and repair people suing homeowners. And this is going to be what we saw in 2001 and 2008. It is going to happen. Why? Well, when people are short of money and they need money, they're going to try to turn to the fastest place that they can. Now, 95% of all lawsuits are settled. So what I'm here to tell you today is you can reduce the chance of getting sued, but you can't eliminate getting sued. What you can reduce or eliminate completely is the ability for somebody to get some or all of your money in a lawsuit. Now, 95% of all lawsuits are settled. And again, when we look at a lawsuit, it's not necessarily the amount of money that you will settle with, but it can be the legal fees. I've seen many cases where business owners will come into our office, real estate owners will come into our office, and they'll say, well, I had to settle a claim for $100,000, but my legal fees were $300,000. So again, sometimes the legal fees far outweigh what the actual settlement is. And who becomes the new target in a crisis? Everyone. So you want to know who a target is? It's you. It's anybody that drives a car, owns a house. If you have something to get, you are now a target. And so when do lawsuits increase? During recessions and depressions. This is commonality. This is where the biggest, if you're a litigator and a civil litigator, a accident attorney, whatever it is, boy, the next year to 2 years are going to be really good for you guys and ladies. And McDonald's, here's a great example, hot coffee case, we call it. Back in 1994, this kind of set the precedent. Stella Liebeck spilled coffee on herself, so she sued McDonald's, and she won $2.86 million. Look, we live in a country now that doesn't want to take a lot of responsibility for themselves. People that will look for an easy way out. They will look for a quick lawsuit. They will look for trying to get something from somebody else without putting in the hard work. Just where we live. You can complain about it all you want, and you can yell and scream about how terrible it is, or just protect your assets and protect your income. So, public opinion. Well, here's a question. What do you think that the opinion of the population as a generality is the quickest way to become a millionaire? Do you think most people would have said lottery, or do you think that most people would have said lawsuit? Well, the answer is lawsuit. There was actually a study done in Manhattan. 1,000 people were asked, what's the quickest way to become a millionaire? Is it a lottery or a lawsuit? And over 92% said lawsuit. And obviously, because you can control it, you can even create your own lawsuits. Now, I'll tell you a little story about this. We had a fellow that came into our office, and this is years back, and I actually was the one that met with him, and I said, so why are you here? He says, well, I need somebody to help me manage my money. I said, okay, what do you do for a living? Oh, he said, I sue people. I said, oh, you're a lawyer. No, I'm not a lawyer, but you sue people. So what do you mean? He said, well, here's what happened. I lived in Canada, and I had an issue with the Canadian IRS there, and I learned the court systems, and I beat my tax bill there. So I moved down here, and I learned the court systems down here, and I now sue people for a living. And I said, I don't understand. He goes, I'll sue them for anything. I mean, if they look at me wrong, if they have a tree that hangs over my yard, if they park in the wrong place. He says, I've got 6 lawsuits outstanding right now, and I'm expecting anywhere between $60,000 to $100,000 in settlements. So to give you some idea, this is actually out there. This happens. And I'll get into some of the other things that I've seen along the way, but these are the things that you have to be prepared for. There is that kind of person that's out there. Now, do you trust the insurance companies? Because what I've had a lot of people do is they'll say, well, I've got an insurance company. I get this argument all the time. And I was actually doing a public presentation once, and I referenced this, and the guy got some guy got really offended. He says, well, I've had this insurance company for 30 years, and I've had some claims, and they paid every single time. I said, tell me about the claims. Well, I had mold, and they paid $3,500. Yeah, and I don't doubt that they would. He goes, I had a roof cave in, they paid $30,000. Yeah, I don't doubt that they would. I said, but the bottom line is that when an insurance company sees a big enough claim, they're going to try to contract you out. Now, I learned about this very early in my life, in that when I was about 19 years old, I had about 60 rental units, 68 to be exact. And during my time as a landlord, I was sued 6 times. So I'll give you an example of learning what it means for an insurance company to try to contract out of a claim. So here I am, I'm sitting in my house in New York, and I get a knock on the door at about 11:30 at night, and there's an Erie County Sheriff at my front door. And I said, wow, oh my God, somebody died, right? So I thought, this is horrible. So, all the blood goes out of you, you kind of get a little shaky, you open the door, and you're waiting for him to tell you about somebody that you love that got in a car accident or died. And he said, Mr. Himmler? I said, yes. And he handed me the lawsuit. He said, you've been served. Now, I'd never been served before. And so I walked into the house, and, of course, now I was thankful that nobody had died, but on the flip side, I'm thinking, what the heck is this? So I read this complaint, and I remember this is back in the early 80s, and apparently, or allegedly, there was a woman who had fallen on ice in front of one of my homes, and the city claimed that it was my responsibility to keep those thoroughfares clean. So, of course, what did I do? Now, keep in mind, the lawsuit at that time, it was somewhere around $3 million. I know it's ridiculous, but that's what they do. They just stack it up. And, of course, I'm reading all these things, and you would have thought that I was like this horrible person. It said, because of Mr. Himmler's actions and not keeping the thoroughfare clean, this woman has suffered severe trauma. She has lost her job. She has fibromyalgia. She has all these unidentifiable things, which I didn't understand the game at that time. So the first thing I do is what I call my insurance company. And my insurance company says, okay, we'll review the claim. They came back to me not too long after that, and they said, well, we're not going to cover your claim. I said, what do you mean you're not going to cover my claim? They said, well, it's $3 million and you're at fault. I said, how do you figure I'm at fault? And of course, the snarky little guy at the other end of the phone says, well, if you turn to page, whatever it was at that time, it was call page 27, in size 2 font, you're reading that thing, and he says, now, please observe this paragraph. It says that it is the landlord's responsibility to keep all walkways and thoroughfares clear of any hazards and debris. And I said, well, I do. I actually have a guy that comes out and he salts and he shovels the snow at 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. And I said, this lady said she fell at 11 o'clock. And so the snarky guy at the insurance company says, well, of course, then it must have iced over. I said, well, how do I control that? I said, I already hired somebody to come out there. I did what I thought was good to keep it clean and safe. He said, sorry, not our fault. I said, so what do you want me to do? You want me to go out there and keep shoveling and salting 24 hours a day so nobody claims that they slipped and fell? I said, yes, we're excluding ourselves. So what I had to end up doing is I had to end up going and hiring my own lawyer to sue the insurance company, and then defend myself against this potentially $3 million claim. Of course, I'm terrified, right? Here I'm a young guy and I'm going to lose a $3 million claim because some lady claims that she fell. You watch this happen in Walmart all the time, but Walmart just issues a couple more shares of stock and they pay off all these ridiculous claims. And, Walmart's smart enough now. They got people patrolling. They got cameras everywhere so they can see when people do this kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm terrified. And so once the insurance company got my lawsuit against them, then they said, okay, well, we'll try to settle with her. And so they settled with her for, you ready for this? $6,000. And I'm out $24,000 in legal fees because I had to hire my own lawyer. And because I hired my lawyer to sue the insurance company, that legal claim wasn't covered underneath my insurance policy. So I learned early on that when it gets to a big number, insurance companies are going to try to find some way out of it. So yeah, your little broken water pipe is fine. Your little fender bender for a couple grand is fine. But we'll talk about this in just a minute in the broadcast here. You have a big claim, like, you hit a neurosurgeon and kill a neurosurgeon making $2 million a year. You got to be really careful that insurance company doesn't try to find something. And I also see things like, people will buy a car, and I've had people come in and say, well, I bought a boat in, where was it, Oregon or Montana or something like that, because I could save sales tax on it. I said, okay, well, where do you boat? Well, I boat in Lake Mead. Okay, you boat in Lake Mead, but did you then change it and identify that with your insurance company? No, I didn't want to register it in Nevada because then I'd have to pay the sales tax. So what you're telling the insurance company is that your boat is in wherever you bought it, Oregon. People do this with cars all the time. We have a lot of people that travel here from California. And what they'll do is they'll buy a California car, because the registration is so much less and the insurance is less, they'll buy the California car, but they'll keep it in Nevada. Well, I said, you got a problem, because if you're on the road and you get in a car accident and that insurance company wants to contract out their claim, they're going to claim, hey, you didn't claim to us that was a Nevada car. You didn't register it in Nevada, right? Because Nevada has the law that once you're here for 30 days, you got to register the car. So you're in this catch-22. So you're really driving an uninsured car. And in what we call an at-fault state like Nevada, that puts a lot of risk on you. And I'll explain what that is at fault in a minute. But you can see that there's all these little catches that the insurance company will try to get you on to not cover you. And so I always ask people, did you read every single requirement of your policy? Did you sit down and identify that? And then, you do that on a yearly basis because, you have things that come up in your life that you need to make changes. People make modifications to their house. Did you get the permit? Did you get it permitted, right? Because a lot of times you make an improvement to your house, and if you don't get it permitted, it may not be covered. If somebody slips and falls or gets hurt on something that was unpermitted, the insurance company might be able to contract it out. So do you update your auto and homeowners disclosures annually? Have you named the right additional insurers? I get people that will say, well, I've got this umbrella policy and I've got this homeowners policy and I've got this and I've got that. I said, okay, but now all your assets are owned by an LLC. Did you name them as the insured or the additional insured? No, it's still in my name. Or I put all my assets into a revocable trust. Okay, did you rename or add them as an additional insured? See, these are all little catches that the insurance company has in their little quiver, their quiver full of arrows. They could pull that out if there's a big enough claim and say, hey, you didn't do this, so we're not covering you, right? So people put assets in their family trust or LLCs, and then what happens on excess claims? So I always use this example with clients because people just don't believe it's ever going to happen to them. And I'll say, okay, so let's say you're driving down the road and let's say it's 5 o'clock p.m. and the sun's in your eyes, it's setting in the west, you're driving west and setting in the west, it's in your eyes, you're going through a stoplight. It looks like it's, green to you because all the cars in front of you had gone, but it is actually red because you can't see it. People make that mistake because all the other cars are going. They can't see the light, so they just go. And now you take out a neurosurgeon making $2 million a year. You think that the claim against you is going to be covered by your $500,000 auto insurance policy? And then people come back, but I got an umbrella. Great, what's that for? $1 million, $2 million? That claim on you is going to be $10 to $12 million for lost income to his family, right? Even more, right? Depending upon the negligence that can be applied. And then you get the states that are either at fault or no fault, right? So in an at fault state like Nevada and many other states, you have to look and say, hey, what they can do is they can assess 100% of the fault against you. In some states, they might assess no fault. They might assess the risk equally between you and the other person. But if they can determine, and it could either be the police report or it could just be the other attorney, if they could determine that you were at fault, then 100% of medical claims, liabilities, everything can fall on your back. And so I always ask people, say, hey, if you've got a $10 million claim against you because you ran that red light and, you've run out of your $500,000 auto policy and your $1 million umbrella, who's going to come up with the other $8.5 million? And so what the plaintiff's attorney is going to do is they're going to start going after assets and going after garnishing wages and income. They're going to go after the equity in your house. They're going to go after taking your cars, taking your investment accounts, taking your IRAs, taking your life insurance, taking your annuities. I'll cover why there's a lot of misunderstanding in those areas in just a minute. But that's what they're going to do. They're going to go after those types of assets. So again, you have to understand what the risk is today. And the more you have, the bigger the target that you are. So here's the biggest misconceptions. I get people misunderstanding this all the time. Well, I've got my money in a retirement plan. It's covered. Well, my insurance agent told me that my life insurance and my annuities are protected from lawsuits. That's the biggest bunch of bunk I've ever heard. So, keep in mind that each state has a statute, but it doesn't mean that state's in a particular lawsuit that judge is going to follow 100% of that rule. That judge, based upon the circumstances within that lawsuit, the losses, or basically whatever the plaintiff can make up, act out, make the judge believe that they're a bigger victim, they can assess a claim against certain assets. So it's hard for me to sit back and say, now look, if you have an annuity in this state, it's 100% protected. There's plenty of cases where in states where they say that a certain annuity is protected, let's say it's protected to $100,000. Now, many states, there's zero protection at all. Some states have some minor protections, but what if you have $300,000 in an annuity and there's $100,000 in a protection? So what that claimant can do is they can force the sale of that annuity. And some people say, well, at least I get my 100, at least I keep my 200. Well, keep in mind, they're also forcing the tax out on you, because when they foreclose on that asset, they're causing a taxable distribution. People will say, well, my home is insured or my home has coverage on it. Depending upon the state that you're in, there is certain foreclosure preventions. Like Nevada, as of the taping of this broadcast, has about $605,000 in total protection on the house, but it includes only your house, and you also have to go through the exercise of filing the actual homestead. People will come to me and they'll say, well, my house is protected. Great, show me your homestead. What's that? Well, that's what you have to file with the county clerk's office to verify that that is, in fact, your actual residence, because it doesn't cover rental properties, it doesn't cover anything else other than your personal residence. So again, there's states like Florida. We saw back in the 90s where those thieves from Enron and MCI and they moved to Florida with the intent on moving assets. I think the guy's name, and boy, if I get this wrong, Jeffrey Skilling is a name that just sticks in my mind. Again, it was 20-some years ago. But I was a resident of Florida at that time, and I remember that the judges in Florida were up in arms because Enron had stolen all this money from people. They lied to people. I think it was Jeffrey Skilling. And if I get the number wrong, again, it's a long time ago, but I think he moved something like $30 million to Florida. And then he built a residence there. And because 100% of the house was covered, they couldn't get to that asset. However, they've changed the rules because now you have to live in the house. You have to be a full-time Florida resident for at least 2 years. And there's some other restrictions and limitations. So they've tried to curb that abuse from people that would use those asset protection havens. But you got to keep in mind that your house, your homestead, you don't want to lose that, because if somebody can come on top of whatever that coverage is and take your house from you, you better be prepared. The other biggest misperception that I find, and this is a sad one because I don't know where it's generated from, people believe that their family trusts give them asset protection. Now, in a minute, I'm going to cover how you can give asset protection to children or grandchildren through a family trust, but you got to die first. But while you are alive, there is zero, zippo, zero, none, absolutely no asset protection on a family trust. Remember, a family trust is designed to avoid probate, to pass over financial control in case you get sick or disabled. But there is none, zero. I can't emphasize it enough because I still get people all the time going, well, all my assets are protected. I said, how do you figure that? Well, I've got it all in a family trust. Oh, and who told you that? Well, the guy that sold it to me. Okay, well, sometimes people selling things will tell you anything that you want. They need to tell you for you to buy it. So family trusts are not asset protected. So really, where are your risks? Well, we have automobiles, and we have what I refer to as interior attacks and exterior attacks. And what an interior attack is let's say you're driving in a car. So I'll give you a great example of this. Back in, let me think, when was this? My gosh, this would have been the early 80s. I'm living in Buffalo, New York. A buddy of mine jumped in a car, and we're going to go skiing. Now, there wasn't any ice on the road. There was no snow on the road. It was completely clear. I was driving under the speed limit. We come up around a curve, and there was literally a sheer ice. It was like an ice rink. And even though I wasn't speeding, because it was a curve, I went into the other lane. We went head on with another car. We were doing 50 miles an hour. The other car was doing 50 miles an hour. Thank God, I broke a few bones, and, sometimes people laugh at me and say it was, you forget things because you're a car accident. That's the old joke. But we lived, and soon thereafter, my buddy sued me. And he won a nice sum from the insurance company. Even though it wasn't my fault, I wasn't doing anything risky, I was not speeding, it was the elements on the outside which were uncontrollable, but he did. And then, of course, what happened? Well, my insurance premiums went up quite a bit for about 6 to 7 years thereafter. He was nice enough not to go after all my personal assets and everything else, but he still yet did sue me. And then you have what I call exterior attacks. And sorry for that little typo there, I should say attacks. But the exterior attacks are you hit somebody else, or you accidentally hit a pedestrian or a bicycle, or, it was interesting because I was out driving the other day, and I pull out onto a road, and I'm going about 35 miles an hour, and there's a bike path. Well, there's a guy that's walking on the sidewalk. He decides he's going to jump into the road, and he's going to cross over the white line because he wants to walk literally in the road. I came about 6 inches from this guy, and of course he is, furious that I didn't see him. And I thought, oh my gosh, that was 6 inches away from hitting this guy. And so again, that's an exterior attack. You have neighbors. Oh my gosh. We have a client in California. Their neighbor sued them for quite a bit of money for cutting some trees and won a nice little settlement. And of course, the guy's insurance goes up. Dogs, big risk, huge risk. We have we have home repairs and lawn care workers. Let me explain something about home care and lawn care workers. A lot of times people will say, well, there's no risk there. Your insurance covers it. Again, here's what I'll give you an example of. You have a handyman come in, and you think, well, I'm hiring him from this handyman company. He comes into your house, and he loses an arm, a finger, he gets electrocuted, whatever it is. And my question to you is, did you get a current copy of his or his boss's insurance and workers' comp? If you didn't, who becomes liable? You did. Every single time you let any single person on your property, you are exposing yourself to risk. And we live in this environment where you're not going to say, hey, you can't come on my property and fix my light bulbs because I got to see your workers' comp and your insurance before you get here, right? We just are so busy. And the same thing with lawn care workers. So I know of a specific case where the lawn care worker came on to the person's property, cut his foot off. He obviously took workers' comp and he tried to sue his boss. But here's what happened. A lot of these smaller companies will let their workers' comp or their general business liability expire. So he went to sue his boss. His boss had nothing, right? So what did he do? He sued the homeowner and won. So again, these are cases where you got to be very careful. Estate planning. There's a lot of lawsuits that happen in estate planning. Family members suing other family members, children suing parents, and even non-related, well, I shouldn't say non-related because you're related, but I mean people that you didn't even have an actual relationship with. So I'll give you a great example. This is something you should Google to give you some idea of how this works. So many of you have heard of the actress Elizabeth Hurley. So there was just a case, and this wasn't too long ago, where her son sued his grandfather. Now, his son, I think, was 15 or 16 years old, something like that, when this happened, very young. And so here's what the story was. Elizabeth Hurley had a relationship with a British physician, and this physician, after finding out that Elizabeth was pregnant, wanted nothing to do with the child. And so there was absolutely no relationship whatsoever. Elizabeth Hurley raised this child. And when the child got old enough to understand that his biological father's father was a billionaire, and he actually subpoenaed for a copy of the trust and found out he was not in the trust. Well, the courts ruled that he could actually put himself into the trust and force an inheritance to himself. So again, people think, well, my kids would never do that. My grandkids. You're talking to a guy that's seen this for 35 years. And when parents come in and say, oh, my kids would never do anything like that, well, I always take that with a grain of salt because I guess I see so much of it. Business owners, ADA. This is a big thing going on. And, when we were in California, we would see all kinds of scams going on with ADA, the American Disabilities Act. So business owners have to be very, very, very careful. So it got to the point in California where some of my clients that would own commercial properties, if somebody came in to use those commercial properties bathroom, they wouldn't let them use it. Because the scam that was going on is somebody would come in a wheelchair, and this was all set up, and they would take a measuring tape and they'd say, can I use your bathroom? I'm disabled. I really need to use your bathroom. They go use the bathroom, and they take a measuring tape and a camera, and they would show, and don't hold me to this exact height, but let's say that you're supposed to have the safety bar near the toilet at whatever it is, 20 inches, right? And so if it's 20 inches, they'd measure it, get a picture of it. Maybe it was 18 inches or maybe it was 22 inches. And then, of course, what their attorney, which is all a setup, would do is they would file a frivolous lawsuit. And, the rules in California have changed now where I think that one person can't bring more than 4 lawsuits within 5 years or something like that. They try to do something. That just means that the attorneys that are pulling this scam are just going to go out and find 4 more people or 5 more people. But then what they would do is they would sue the business owner, and then the business owner would take a bad mark, then they would have to do all this rehab, then they would have to pay a settlement. Never went to court, right? And so now what you have is you have a big, big risk on websites. And so here's an example. Beyonce got sued for $1 million because her website was not ADA compliant. Winn-Dixie, Domino's Pizza, Burger King, Nike. You can Google all this and read about how ridiculous these lawsuits are. But there are a sect of our population that all they're doing on a daily basis is looking for a weakness as to what and where they can sue you. Again, you can complain about it. And yeah, it makes me just as frustrated as it does you, but you can do something about it. You can actually prevent or reduce it. So what do you insure? Well, I always say, what do you insure, the golden eggs or the goose? And you know what I find? 90%, if not more, of people actually have the eggs insured and not the goose. They have their house insured. They have their car insured. But what they don't have insured is the assets, the IRAs, the annuities, the life insurance, the investment accounts, the brokerage accounts. They insure, a car. And I always say to people, look, if you were in a car and let's say you lost your car. We're not assuming you get sued, you're in an accident and you kill that neurosurgeon for $2 million and you got a $10 million claim. I'm assuming, let's say that somebody steals your car, right? Or your car, like those funny commercials that are on TV, when they show examples of the car launching through the window by accident or the tree falling on the car and you walk out in the morning with your cup of coffee to go to work and there's, a giant 40-foot oak tree laying on your car. Well, you lose your car, right? Can you recover from that? Yeah, of course you can. It's a car, right? If you have a roof fall in, if you have an air conditioner go out, if you have a broken pipe, can you cover that? Yeah, you can cover that. Even if your house burned down. Now, I never, ever suggest that you keep 100% equity in your house. It's called equity stripping, especially in low interest rate environments. You shouldn't have a big portion of your net worth tied up in your house. It's, again, just leaving open a target. So let's say that you have one of those things that happens. You have a fire, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you say, gosh, I lost my house, I lost my car. Could you recover? Yeah, as long as you can still go to work, you can still earn income, and your asset base, meaning your stocks, your bonds, your investments, your retirement plan, those are all intact. However, what happens if you do go through that intersection, you take out that guy with $2 million a year in income, you got a $10 million claim. Now they take all of the assets that are producing the income. So again, you got to look at where the risks are and what do you protect. So we talk a lot about people missing out on combining their estate plan and their asset protection plan. Because what most people do is think, oh, I got a trust and it's just going to bypass probate and that's all I really wanted to do. And I just want my money to pass on to my kids. Well, look, you earned it. I'm assuming you earned it because if you respect it, or if you earned it, you respect it. If you inherited it, maybe you don't respect it as much. If you won it like a lottery, you certainly don't expect it and respect it. There's such a small percentage of people that make it out alive through a lottery experience. Either they keep the money or they're sane after that experience. So I'm assuming you earned it, so you respect it. So I'm also assuming that when you pass away, that whatever you have, you want to stay protected. So I show people this example of the typical probate trust. What we have found in our firm is that about 9 out of 10 of these trusts exist. So out of 10 people that have trusts, they have this kind of trust. And I went into this before on Trust Part 1 early in another broadcast, which you can jump on the YouTube channel. You can find that existing broadcast and replay it. And there's Trust 1 and Trust 2, and I still am going to produce Trust 3 and 4, so you can jump on there and find that. But long and short of it is that if you have a probate-only trust and you're just passing cash on to the next generation, you're preventing them from ever having any asset protection. So here's the example, probate-only trust. You have, let's say, 3 kids. On the last to die of your trust, it says give the money to each one of the 3 kids, right? So now the kids own it. And you're going to learn in just a minute, you crossed over the ownership wall. And again, I say this over and over again, it's better to control it than it is to own it. All right, so now you got last person dies, the trust pays out that money to each of the children, right? Now the children own it. So let's say that the last person dies on Monday, husband and wife, dad dies first, mom dies on a Monday. On Tuesday, that money went down to the kids, and on Wednesday, child 1 dies, passes away. Well, that money was in child 1's name. So by operation of common law, where does it go? Boom, it goes to the spouse. Well, let's say that on Thursday, the spouse remarries. We always joke and say, yes, it was a long grieving period. But on Thursday, the spouse remarries, right? On Friday, the spouse dies or gets divorced. Where's the money go? To the new spouse. Does it go to your bloodline, your children? No, because if you don't combine your estate plan and your asset protection plan together, this is what you're going to see as a result in a high percentage of the cases. So a typical, what we refer to as a probate-only trust, it only performs 2 duties. It eliminates probate and it assigns financial responsibility if you're disabled. But let me be clear, there is zero, none, nada, asset protection for you with your revocable family trust. If your trust is designed correctly, you can give children and grandchildren asset protection. But here's the rule of thumb. If you have easy, unfettered ability to get, spend, move, change any asset within your family trust, when and if you get sued, you have lost that asset, because the courts are going to look at it and say, it doesn't matter if it's in a trust or not, in this a family trust. Because if you have complete control of it, it's really like it's yours, right? Because remember, a probate-only trust is really designed just to eliminate probate and to assign financial responsibility if you get sick or ill, not asset protection. And again, what you're looking to do is protect against what I call the 3 DLs. These are the risks of losing money through death, lawsuit, divorce, or disability. Let's talk about that ownership wall that I just brought up. And so number one, don't own anything. So I'll tell you a little story. Many years ago, when I was working for a firm in New York, I was doing tax returns back then, and I remember my boss coming into me and said, I want you to help me on this tax return. And he handed me these tax returns. And being young and not really understanding the asset protection strategy, I went to my boss and I said, I don't understand this. I'm doing a trust tax return for a Nevis Island trust that owns an airplane. And he said, yeah. He said, this is our client. I said, well, why aren't we just doing it in the client's name? He looked at me, and of course I was young and didn't really understand it. And he said, oh, you have so much to learn. And I said, I just don't understand. He goes, our clients never own anything. They just use it. So if they get the economic benefit from it, who cares who owns it? Because what he was trying to say is, look, if this client of that firm at that time that I was doing the tax return for, if he was sued or whatever happened, they can't get to the airplane, they can't get to the trust because he doesn't own it. Now, does he fly in it? Yeah, he flies in it, but he doesn't own it. So in other words, don't own anything. Control everything, and you just obtain the economic benefits from it. That's the key. Obtain the economic benefits. So perception is everything. In a lawsuit, it is not really what is, but what the plaintiff's attorney can create in a world of perception, right? 99% of lawsuits are how good that plaintiff's attorney is in creating that picture. And they will, you might have 1 or 2 rental properties. What do? They portray you as the rich landlord. You're the land baron, right? Do you have multiple assets in the same bucket? And do you have other assets such as retirement plans? So I'll give you another great example of this in asset protection. We had a client come in the LA office, and he was in the entertainment business, and his parents had left him a very large 10-story apartment building in West Hollywood, and he was netting $1 million from that apartment building. And his parents misinformed him by telling him that as long as you keep that apartment building in your name and a checking account in your name, if you ever get a divorce, she could never get it. So he comes into us and says, well, the judge ruled in this manner, and I'm wondering if you could do anything about it. I'm like, what do you mean? Who are we? You had a judge rule and pass down a ruling. Well, like, what are we going to do for you? Right? That's done deal. And so I said, there's absolutely nothing that we can do. He goes, well, you have some really good attorneys that that you work with, and can't we pass it by them? I said, it's a waste of time. You messed up, because here's what happened. Well, he got all the rents. The rents were about $1 million, and he put it into the checking account. That was a separate checking account. But then he made the fundamental mistake of taking the profit and then moving it into his marital assets. So everything that he was spending for his cars, for his travel, for his kids' education, for the marital house, he was bringing that out of that checking account for the rental property. So the judge passed down judgment that she gets the rental income. He says, well, how's that fair? I said, well, I read the pleadings. I said, honestly, she had a great plaintiff's attorney. And here's what the premise, the perception was. He was a TV actor making $3 million a year, and the rental property was only making $1 million a year. The plaintiff's attorney said to the judge, hey, judge, listen, if this guy loses his job because they cancel his show, she can't depend upon the income from that show, but she can depend upon the income from that rental property, and she's got the marital home, she's got the kids to raise, so the judge granted it, right? So at the time, he didn't get too upset about it, because he said, well, that's right, there's $4 million, she's only getting $1 million, I got a better deal. Until they canceled his show. So now he has no income. She gets the entire income from the house, And he's sitting back going, well, how is this fair? So again, it's the perception of what somebody else can create. And when you're in a crisis situation, I would say that everybody that drives a car, owns a house, or a business is a target. So how do you lose asset protection? How do you mistakenly put it out there in the open as a target? Well, I think that the mistake that most people make is they create a direct connection with their assets. Here's an example. You have a revocable living trust, right? Well, if you can go in there and you can take it out, it's in your name. You still own it and you control it. The key is take away the ownership and still control it. Well, how do you create that asset protection? What you do is you create a vault in between. And that vault may take the nature of a couple different devices, which I'll cover in a minute. But the key is, again, control it, don't own it. What are the devices? Well, we can use offshore trusts. We can use a Nevada Asset Protection Trust, otherwise known as a self-settled trust, or also known as a NAPT. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but it's NAPT. And there's a series LLC for rental properties. And there's an ordinary LLC for investments. This protects against lawsuits on the investments. There's profit sharing plans. Why? Because your IRA is not protected. So if you get sued, you want to have what's called an ERISA-based plan to obtain asset protection on your retirement plan. And then finally, if you're a California resident, you have something called a California Private Retirement Plan Availability. Again, that is a retirement plan. It's not a profit sharing plan. It's not an IRA. It's a special type of retirement plan in California that offers you protection against bankruptcies and against lawsuits. So the mistakes using asset protection devices, here's what I find. A lot of people, they'll hear this and they'll jump onto some online thing like Rocket Lawyer or LegalZoom or whatever it is, and they'll go, oh, I got an LLC now. And they come into me and I'll say, how's your asset protection? Oh, I'm completely protected. I got an LLC. Where'd you get it? I got it on LegalZoom, Rocket Lawyer, wherever else I got it online. Okay. And I'll say, let me see your operating agreement. Crickets. What is that? Well, if you get sued, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to say, produce an operating agreement. Let's see how you have structured the contractual back end of an LLC to protect you. Who has rights? Who has voting rights? Can you foreclose on the shares? And they'll say, I don't have one of those. Well, then you really don't have asset protection. You might have an entity. People also come in and they'll go, I have an LLC. I said, well, okay, let me see your operating agreement. Well, I don't need one. Well, you do need an operating agreement. I mean, physically, you can pay money to any state whatsoever. They'll register you an LLC. And you think, oh, I have a business license and I got an LLC with the state of whatever. I got an LLC. Listen, if you're called in front of the IRS or you're called in front of a judge, you don't really have an LLC until you have a very strong operating agreement. And that operating agreement needs to be kept up to date. So I find a lot of people have these devices, they get them once, and they think it's like brushing teeth once. You know, you're 6 years old. Mom, I brushed my teeth. I'll never have to do it again the rest of my life. No, if you miss 3 days of brushing your teeth, you can't do it twice as many times in the next 3 days to make up for it. It doesn't work that way. And it doesn't work that way with any kind of asset protection vehicle. I find that people will get LLCs and they'll go online because they know they need to have some asset protection. They'll come into us and they'll say, I've got this LLC. Great, let me see your operating agreement. Then they give us the operating agreement. I said, good, you've got it. At least you got an operating agreement. It looks, like it's structured correctly. And now where are your shares? What do you mean my shares? Otherwise known as beneficial interests. If anybody is up on this stuff and you're going to send me an email to correct me and tell me that LLCs don't have shares, they have membership interest. Look, let's relax, right? Because I get all these emails. Well, you said this incorrectly. This is educational, right? I talk about dividends and S corps. They're not dividends, they're owner distributions, but the population understands dividends. So we understand they're not technically shares unless you have a corporation that issues shares, but an LLC issues membership interest, same as shares. They're a certificate, but I'll say, where's your certificates or your shares? I don't have those. What do you mean I don't have them? Well, how did you do it? Well, I went online. Did you issue shares? Did you do an issuance of shares? No, I never did that. Well, guess what? How do you have an LLC? You don't have an issuance of shares. Or then I'll get people go, yeah, I issued the shares. Well, wait a minute. The shares are in your name. Yeah, they're in my name. Well, you have a revocable living trust. Okay. So now if you die Everything that you've done with your revocable trust to avoid probate, guess what? Your LLC shares, they're going to go through probate. Why? They're in your name. Or then I get the worst situation, which is a non-marital couple LLC or partnership. And you have, two guys say, I'm going to start a lawn care business, Billy Bob and Jimmy Joe, right? And they get together, they go, okay, let's set up an LLC because that's what we heard is the best. And they set up an LLC and they go online, they get an operating agreement, or they have an attorney get an operating agreement. And let's say they even issue the shares. Let's say they even go to that extent to issue the shares. And now they come into us and I'll say, okay, I see your operating agreement is kind of off the press, but what happens if you become disabled? Do you have a provision that your partner's not going to take you for a ride? And if you die, how's the buyout work? So again, you can set these devices up, but I strongly try to dissuade people from just doing the cheap method because it usually backfires on you. I find people make mistakes with commingling funds. People will set up a series LLC to protect the assets on a rental property. They'll have 3 rental properties. They'll set up a series LLC, which means you have a separate LLC, a sub LLC for each of your properties. And then they'll go and set up one checking account. Well, you just commingled the funds. Or you'll have an LLC to do asset protection. Yet you're operating that like a personal checking account. You can't do that. It's got to be done as per whatever the proper, what we call form is. Each entity, whether it's a NAPT, whether it is a LLC, whether it is a corporation, it has what we call proper form. Form is how you operate that business, how you put assets in and account for that, how you file the tax returns for it, how you take money in and how you take money out. Look, don't go open up an LLC, get a credit card, and then go around town going to dinner on that. You would need to do an owner's distribution from the LLC to your personal account and spend the money in your personal account, right? Otherwise, some judge or some plaintiff's attorney that's pretty slick is going to look at that LLC and go, that was a sham. That was just, that was a smoke screen. There's no legitimate LLC here. You're just using this as a personal account. They're going to try to blow it up on you. Trying to do it yourself. Biggest mistake I've ever seen. Online low-cost LLCs and document entities, right, that just say, here's your 2-page operating agreement. And believing the carnival barkers. I've been invited to some of these in Vegas where there's all these conferences and there's these seminar companies, right? And they'll sell gold and they'll sell, start your own business. And the most famous one is buy real estate. And in order to buy real estate, you got to set up an LLC, right? And then they've got some person there that's just selling the LLCs and they're just signing you up, no different than LegalZoom, right? And they're telling you, well, you've got this Utah property and we're going to set up a Nevada LLC and it's 100% protected. Or we're going to go ahead and get you a property in Ohio and we're going to put it inside of your Nevada LLC. Look, states don't respect other states' laws. You could set up a NAPT and you could have California properties in that NAPT. You get sued in California because some person says that they slipped or fell, you had black mold or whatever it is. And California's going to laugh at it. They're going to go, we don't care if you have a NAPT or not. You're in California, the asset's in California. So if we're going to attach to foreclose on that property, it's going to be in California. That just reminded me of something else. I got to bring this one up with you. Here's another lawsuit that we worked with the client on. So we're in our LA office. We get a call from the guy. He comes in. He says, listen, I've been living on this yacht in the Greek Isles for the last 10 years. And I'm thinking, like Jackie Onassis thing, right? That was a little 40-footer, but hey, it was kind of a cool lifestyle. And I said, so why are you here? He goes, well, he said, here's where I'm at. And it always is the case. Families come to us after they've lost assets. Business owners come to us after they're in the middle of a lawsuit. It's just so common, right? And it's not just lawsuits from outside people. It could be IRS lawsuits. And they always want to know, what can I do afterwards? I'm here to tell you, don't even bother, right? If you're in a lawsuit, no one can do a single thing for you. You cannot fraudulently transfer things. People always want to do that in the emergency. It's like being in a lifeboat, right? If you're in a lifeboat and your main boat sunk and you got a hole in the lifeboat, it doesn't do you any good. You can sit there and bail the water out all you want. You're still in the lifeboat. You cannot get back on the boat. So this guy comes in. He says, hey, I have this apartment building and they're suing me for tens of millions of dollars, these tenants. I said, okay, well, tell me what the situation is. And he said, so these 2 tenants, they were working in the entertainment business. They were art directors. And he said, I thought it was kind of odd because they requested a basement apartment. I said, okay. And he said, so what they're suing me for is don't even remember the number. It was $20 million or $30 million or something ridiculous, but it was a big property, right? And I said, so what happened? He says, well, here's what we can surmise from what they did. What they did is they duct taped all of the doorway openings. Then what they did is they filled the basement apartment, with about 6 inches of water. And then they left to Europe on a movie shoot for 9 months. So no one knew that the apartment was flooded. When they got back, most of the water had evaporated or dried up. However, there was mold everywhere. When they got back, what they did is they they called the city inspector to come out and take pictures. We got a housing violation. And then about a month later, then we get served with a lawsuit. So apparently they claimed it was moldy. It caused long-term lung damage, black mold, poison, all these other things. And so again, this is what you're faced with. People actually are setting up other people to create lawsuits. So again, you got to be careful of when you go to one of these seminars and somebody says, well, just set up a Nevada LLC and it'll protect a property in Ohio. It doesn't mean that that's going to be the case. Know the upsides and downsides to each device. So here's an example. In Nevada, no one can foreclose on your share. So you could set up an LLC in Nevada and somebody could get a claim against you in Nevada, but they can't foreclose on your shares like a corporation. See, in a corporation, they can actually foreclose. I use that word, it's not the correct legal terminology, but it makes sense to most people. They can foreclose on your shares. They can take your shares. They can cash them out. And they can do that in many states on LLCs. But what we have here is what's called exclusive remedy. Now, not all states are that good and that protective. And what exclusive remedy is if somebody sues your LLC here, the only income that they can get, even if they get the judgment, is if you distribute money. And since you control what you distribute, they may not ever get anything. So what does that do? That takes the steam or the puff out of the plaintiff's attorney of going after these things, because they know they could win, but then they never win. And since an attorney is going to get 30 to 40% of the winnings, they could win a judgment on your multi-million-dollar LLC, right? But if they can't get anything out, the attorney's out all that production money, that litigation money, all that money that they spent going through that court, they don't get any of it back. So it's usually a deterrent. And most of the time, if everything is set up correctly, what you'll find is the plaintiff's attorney will just say, let's settle. You might settle for 10 grand, 20 grand, whatever it is, and the attorney gets his cut, the plaintiff gets his cut, and everybody's done, right? And it's just part of what the United States offers to us. There's a lot of great and there's some really negative sides to it, but that's better than somebody getting a full claim against everything that you own and taking every last dollar that you have. And so the other problem I have is insurance agents selling life insurance and annuities when they claim you are protected. I get this one a lot. People will come in and they'll say, well, my annuity agent, my financial advisor, which is really just an annuity selling agent masquerading as a financial advisor or financial planner. It's interesting how everything just comes back to mutual funds and annuities with these guys. But they claim to me that, all my assets in my life insurance and my annuities are safe and they can't be sued. Now, I can tell you, this isn't a Las Vegas, Nevada problem. I have practiced in New York, I've practiced in California, I've practiced in Florida. I hear the same thing all the time. It's this non-supported sales gimmick that these insurance guys use, or ladies use, to sell the policy because people think the assets are protected, when they're not. So again, that's a mistake. So what do you do next? Well, what my suggestion would be is, find somebody, we do what's called an asset protection analysis. We'll review what assets are at risk. We'll review what your options are to protect those assets. And then we'll review the setup cost and ongoing cost to compare what's at risk. Because here's what you have to accept. Any kind of asset protection device, it's going to have a cost. You can cheap out and try to do it yourself or go online and do it. And then you're at the perils of your own mistakes and what you don't know. Or you can hire somebody that knows how to do these things, how to look for where the holes are, and as much as they can protect it. You can never be 100%. You can only mitigate, reduce. But you also have to consider, what is my cost? What is my cost of the setup? And what is my ongoing cost? And then I compare that to a couple things. Number one is, what is my risk? What could I lose? And number two is, if I have the right device, am I saving taxes? So here's an example. if we charge $2,500 to set up an LLC and it costs you on an annual basis, it's going to cost you about $1,100, which is $500 for a tax return, $600 for the state renewal, right? So you got $2,500 in, you got $1,100 a year. If you're sitting on $10 million, does that make sense to spend that kind of money to insure $10 million? I don't know how you think. I think it's a worthwhile expense. But you might also have some tax savings with that. That might provide you $5,000 a year in tax savings. If you're in a 30% tax bracket, there's $1,500 a year. So you have to look at what those costs are versus what are you going to get in asset protection and potentially some tax benefits. Now, in order to schedule a call, here's how you can do it. You can jump on the phone, call our office. If it's non-office hours, just leave a message. We'll get back to you. It's 844-702-1040. Again, it's 844-702-1040. Or what you can do is you can go right to our webpage at hhrdm.com and just go to the contact page, put your information in there, hit submit. We'll get a little message. That way we can get a hold of you and we can schedule a 30-minute complimentary phone conference with one of our one of our business advisors or tax advisors. Okay? With that in mind, hopefully you've gotten educated on asset protection, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the broadcast. Ken Himmler signing off.